Hello, I am Emanuel Pastreich, Director of the Asia Institute here in Seoul, and I'm here together with Raekyong Lee, President of the Tomorrow, one of Korea's leading think tanks for progressive and innovative policy.
Thank you for your comment.
Sure, well, he's joined us here for this special report on the Tomorrow, specifically about the response to North Korea and the recent deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system. So for a little bit of background, a large number of Korean police swarmed onto the golf course at Seongju, just 300 miles southeast of Seoul, just before dawn on April 26th. They pushed aside the protesters and escorted an U.S. Army, a group of military trailers that were dragging the parts for the THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, missile defense system, missile launchers, and an ANTPY-2 radar system, and the interceptors that were then essentially set up before dawn in a rather strange and shocking manner. Now, this land at Seongju was part of a golf course belonging to the Lotte Group conglomerate, which had been transferred to the Korean government in a rather obscure, strange real estate transaction. Although the incident did not grab the headlines around the world, we felt it really marked a fundamental shift in Korea-U.S. relations because the act to deploy this controversial missile system before the May 9th Korean presidential elections, to make it a fait accompli, was so blatantly inappropriate and ignoring proper procedure and ultimately illegal. So the question for us is, why did the Korean government agree to this rather risky move at this moment?
First of all, I would like to make a clear statement.
Please.
That any agreement to deploy the THAAD to any place in the peninsula is illegal and not sensible, as the office of Korean president is vacant now.
Right.
No decision on such a critical issue can be made by acting government without due diligence and proper procedure. They must wait for next government to take office.
Makes sense.
Secondly, the deployment of THAAD requires approval of the National Assembly or even the Korean People's General Vote for it. The open debate on this topic is critical because it is not only about North Korea, but it could be an act that upset the military balance and launch a deadly arms race between the China, Korea, Japan, United States, even Russia. Such a risk of rising the tension go far beyond U.S.-Korea mutual defense treaty, and it demands a comprehensive debate.
Right.
Instead, the acting government just signed a working level agreement between the Korean Ministry of Defense and United States of Pacific Command.
Right.
It's ridiculous. The whole matter is treated as a bureaucratic matters.
Right.
But in fact, it is such a situation, Korean future is at stake.
Right.
It looks like that U.S. Army and members of acting government in Seoul took these actions in an effort and wishes to influence the coming presidential election in favor of conservative.
Right.
The action were illegal in common sense and even unethical in political and diplomatic aspect.
Right. Well, and I appreciate your identifying this critical point because I think many people in the United States and elsewhere in the world don't really understand what the problems were in the process. But ultimately, the question for us is, who let this happen, right? After all, the Democratic Party's candidate, Moon Jae-in, has suggested that the deployment of THAAD should be put off until the next administration. And there are lots of questions about whether the decision-making process, as you suggested, was even appropriate. The Korean government doesn't have a president, and there's a prime minister, Hwang Kyo-an, who's just in an acting position. And this has been followed up. The deployment by a demand from President Donald Trump that Korea pay $1 billion for the cost of the THAAD system, even though the Korean Army is not allowed even to use the system, sounds like a rather terrible decision and a really strange demand to make at this moment. Well, what do you think was happening and going on in the mind of President Trump in making that sort of statement?
Okay. As mentioned before, such an important decision should have waited for next government.
Right.
And approval in public spheres following debate in a very proper manner. It is not clear and yet confirmed who made such an actual decision, but it seems in this process Kim Kwan-jin,
right,
as head of National Security Council in Blue House, and the Admiral Harris, head of U.S. Pacific Command.
Right. Admiral Harry Harris is well known as a
sure.
war hawk in the military.
Both figures are well known, as you mentioned, as addicted to a war. We call it mad dog.
Right.
Ready to buy just everything for nothing. They do not care about security.
Right.
They want to find out ways pile of weapons by increasing the budget in the region. The ties to the defense industry, especially in US, is very strong.
Right.
I don't believe Trump and his White House staffs are deeply involved in such a decision deploy the THAAD to some area in such a hurry. They are just informed and current situation and use it as a part of the effort to raise up the tension in the region.
Right.
The recent statement of President Trump about Korea being part of China is indicating how poor his understanding on Korean modern history and even less understanding of contemporary geopolitics. He could not make a decision even he wanted to.
Right. He doesn't have any knowledge to make a decision.
Trump is a typical profit-driven and cynical businessman. He has to calculate what he thinks are possible profit and losses from this situation and make his own off-the-cuff remark.
Right.
There is nothing surprising about his action as someone entirely unqualified for such a job. The question is, what happened to the United States that allowed such a person to become a president?
That's a very, very important question. And by the way, following his comments about the $1 billion payment for THAAD, President Trump also said that the Chorus Free Trade Agreement has to be renegotiated. And he used a very aggressive, hostile term, terminated, when he talked about what he called this horrible deal. Now, of course, the Koreans themselves made a lot of compromises for this trade agreement. What do you think Trump is trying to say here?
All I can hear is echoes his reactionary call, American first.
America first, right.
He's as deluded as his followers that United States can rule forever in the world and assert absolute authorities like a Rome emperor in human history.
Right.
Trade must be based on mutual benefit.
Right.
And must be adhered to the transparent rule that are open to everybody.
Right, very true.
The current FTA between Korea and USA is imperfect in this respect.
Right.
Many scholars and experts have advised that we need an open economic system that assure mutual benefit. That has to be the future of the global economy of the world.
Right.
This short-sighted bullying and sabre-rattling by President Trump merely undermines all authority for United States. In worst case, Koreans should be ready to withdraw Korean-US FTA in order to protect our national sovereignty and to keep decision-making process for the administration and economics in our hand.
Right.
Such a move would be painful in some short term, some Korean and some areas. But we must be ready to do so when we enter into the negotiation.
Right.
United States also will lose a lot if we fail to reach the agreement
Right.
in the negotiation. Why not we take the chance of derive
Right.
during this the occasion in our favor?
Right, right. Well, there's certainly, if the United States or the Trump administration is going to say that they're willing to end the relationship, then if in negotiations, Korea, I think, has to start with the same assumptions in order to negotiate. But I fear when I look at these recent events that even if we manage to get through these days till the election, that these incidents, like President Trump's comments, will lead to increasing anti-American sentiment in South Korea and in Asia, and will profoundly diminish American influence. What are your thoughts about what the long-term results?
It is true. I feel such a danger.
Right.
If you reflect the history, the U.S. and Korea relation is full of contradictions over the last 10 years. That some Americans are supporting Korean independence and democracy, while many others are undermining Korea.
Right. We see both.
I feel it's as like a marriage.
Right.
We can find out many ways for those serious about future of two countries to work together in spite of all the conflict and effort to stir up the troubles. There will be a great hostility, sure, aimed at Trump and at the U.S. military. But we can and we should also set up a means having honest dialogue as well so as to avoid bright anti-Americanism.
Yes, well, I certainly feel in our work here together at the Tomorrow that we've had, as a Korean and American, opportunity to work very honestly, to be honest about the problems that we face, and to put forth a constructive proposal for real cooperation.
Yes, our economic success is actually based on American support, and they are opening the market.
So there's that potential. And yet, the question is, are there any ways to create a more constructive relationship between the United States and Korea, which is not just dependent on making a North Korean threat? I mean, do we have to build this monster, this fantasy of a North Korean threat, taking over the world before Koreans and Americans can work together?
Yeah. I'm sure.
I hope
Koreans know about Korea much better than Americans.
For sure.
And they know how to solve such a dispute themselves in the context of history. If the chance is given.
Right.
We take an easy example that the Kim Dae-jung Sunshine Policy
right.
dramatically improved the relation between North and South Korea. There was a dispute, and with local limited war or fighting,
right.
but they could be easily managed.
Right.
And there is no real danger of North Korean nuclear program during DJ period.
Right. So in the case of the Kim Dae-jung administration back in 2000, 99-2000, there was an effort. Sunshine policy to engage North Korea. The assumption of sunshine is that if you have a warm, open environment, that North Korea will naturally be less reserved and less skeptical and engage. but if you have a lot of rain and you have a very cold environment, that they will inevitably, try and protect themselves. And this policy was essentially effective, right?
Definitely.
For the first step. Of course, it was not continued on to build the high level confidence that they could have been, but the initial efforts were successful. And yet, since then, the United States has gone from that to the Bush administration, which was essentially confrontational, but still allowed for dialogue with North Korea and the six-party talks, to the Obama administration, which was much worse, right? They used the term strategic patience, but in fact it was strategic neglect, really. No dialogue with North Korea, no space for real discussion, and personally I think worse than the Bush administration in that respect. And now with Trump, we have a strategic incompetence, right? Total ignorance about North Korea, and basically just going from one event to another, looking for, as you said, the bottom line, profit. So this makes the situation in some ways much more risky or dangerous.
Yeah, it is true, and there is very sad stories for Korean people. After years of isolations, fearing they will be thrown like Libya or Iraq,
right?
I think North Korea has no way, but they has thrown itself into developing the nuclear weapon to protect
nuclear weapons,
the survival. And this race is now reaching to quite a risky stage.
True.
But frankly speaking, the responsibility lies largely within the United States, who has not held up its promise and has been remarkably aggressive in its action during last decade.
Maybe I could just say something about that question. That THAAD missile system, the idea of missile defense, is related to a decision of the Bush administration in 2001, essentially to pull out of serious negotiations on arms control with Russia, and to basically make the argument that the United States no longer needs to negotiate arms control agreements with other countries, but it can just use missile defense to stop all missiles. However, as many scientists and experts have shown, this is a fantasy. Missile defense is incapable of stopping missile attacks, and the only way to control nuclear weapons, which are a very serious threat, is through serious, engaged negotiations.
I suspect the real background truth of U.S. policy on North Korean nuke is not targeted in North Korea.
Right.
But maybe they make excuse and some reasons to build up the military powers against China rising up and containing them in United States power.
Right.
Anyhow, we cannot solve the problem with weapon-to-weapon reactions.
Right.
We need to work for peace. That is only the possible option in
true.
Korean Peninsula. That is my answer. And we should make a new and more comprehensive proposal to both Pyongyang and Washington. Even we cannot simply go back to the sunshine policies.
Very true.
We need to start addressing the current situation, not pretending North Korea is something it is not. It's very, very risky and dangerous. We can create new policy which can offer the appealing the package and which should freeze the current program and provide opportunities of integration and exchange in peaceful and constructive process.
Right.
But what we really need to do is to sit down together and to take plenty of time to get to know each other and to go get through the details and to use our imagination to come up with road toward peaceful dialogue.
Right. However, sadly, looking at recent U.S. military policy, it seems to be increasingly driven by profit interests, increasingly acting like a mercenary force. What happened to the United States?
I don't know the United States and its politics. But it's true, there is a powerful group in U.S. that has been transformed into crazy merchant of madness. Around the world, they are causing death and destruction, and they know only their own bottom lines.
True.
I only advise that such a foolishness will bring tremendous and misfortune eventually to the United States.
Very true.
We need the power of peace,
Very true.
which can be stronger than any weapon, even the overcome the greed found in defense industry. The power of peace means the taking action and working together to stage the protest, asserting the both in anger and love at international level with the people from Korea, in Japan, United States, and around the world.
And then it seems, when I look at the issue of security, this word security, it seems like we're sometimes propping up this very outdated, old weapon system because those in power don't really want to think seriously about the real challenges, real security of our age. We're facing the threat of climate change, which will cost us more than our whole military budgets in the future. We face cyber threats and the proliferation of drones and other weapons which need to be, they can't be countered, but they can be controlled and regulated. And yet, some of these people don't seem to be wanting to move forward to think about what security means.
Frankly speaking, I'm not an expert on these issues because I've focused rather on domestic issues like wealth polarization, welfare policy, reform of domestic political system and economic policies. But you are completely right. Sustainability can be secured only through the international cooperation and by introducing the common regulation on climate changes, air pollutions, regulations on drones and other dangerous new weapons. Yeah, we are now faced to risk damage on Earth that cannot be repaired.
Well, in Korea, here in South Korea, for example, each year, like last year, and no Koreans were killed by North Korean attacks, but thousands and thousands of people died because of air pollution and other chemicals in our environment. So the risk is extremely high, in fact. But ultimately, when we think about these new emerging problems, especially looking from the United States or from abroad, people are concerned. Why is it that Koreans cannot express their opinion? Why is there no Korean perspective in the newspapers on security? No independent research. After all, Koreans know a lot more about North Korea than Americans do. And yet, we have this group of American experts, at Brookings or CSIS. They can't even say "안녕," but they're lecturing Koreans to tell Koreans what they should be doing.
Okay, I think there are some groups of scholars and professionals in Korean society has a very good wisdom and depth. Who can write about unification and security and future of Northeast Asia. But there lies some language problems because Koreans are not good at English in writing and speaking. And also we have a very bad history of the last 10 years. Very, very conservative or extremely right-wing government.
Right.
Unfortunately, The scholars and professionals not promoted overseas
Right.
or invited to the conference international grade. In some cases, no one tried to translate their performance and achievement of studies in their writings into English.
Very true.
The conservative leading medias, I think you know, wanted to block or pretend that they are not existing.
Right.
Now, tomorrow, my organization plans to
Right.
publish a report on the issues you mentioned this year. Hopefully, this book can trigger an active debate on the future on international base and cooperation. I really hope to do so.
Well, it's very exciting that the Tomorrow has taken the initiative to start this dialogue, and I hope that we can bring together some of the thoughtful individuals with a long-term vision for the future, for security, for diplomacy, and for the economic well-being of the people of Korea, to work together with others here in Korea, in the United States, and throughout the region, to come up with a realistic and meaningful vision for what security really means. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure.
And I hope others will be able to join the Tomorrow as we plan for bigger events and activities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.